Many people wonder what we use for our sunroom foundations. In some cases, you may need to install a full concrete foundation with a slab. Typically, that's when the floor of the sunroom will be super close to the ground. However, most people have the option of choosing a raised platform by utilizing footings. Now, in the past, we have used different sized sonotubes to create these concrete footings. But this method has several disadvantages. First of all, it's very hard work. If you've ever had to dig a hole for a footing, you know what I mean. Another issue is soil condition. When you dig for a concrete footing, you have a certain depth you need to hit before you can install your footing. Typically, this is below the frost line at about 42 or 48 inches. But what is the condition of the soil down there? How much of a load can the footing hold up without sinking? One other major issue with footings is that they are very time-consuming to install. It takes a good amount of time to dig for the footings. But even if you were able to use an excavator to dig the area out, you still need to install the sonotube forms, wait for the inspector to approve them, mix and pour the concrete, and then wait for the concrete to cure before building on it. So needless to say, we don't use concrete footings. What do we use? Helical piles. What on earth is a helical pile, and how are they better than concrete footings? Well, this is a helical pile. Basically, it's a huge screw that screws into the ground. That large helix at the bottom of the post is not only what helps guide the post into the ground, it also acts as the footing that the sunroom will be ultimately resting on. So why do we use these, and how are they better than the concrete footings? Well, let's look at the three disadvantages we talked about with concrete footings in relation to helical piles. First of all, we talked about concrete footings being hard work. What about helical piles? Well, as you can see pictured here, it is relatively easy work to install a helical pile as compared to a concrete footing. A small, minimally invasive machine is remote controlled to push the piles into the ground. There are some cases where it does get a bit more complicated than this, but generally using these footings is much easier. Second, we talked about soil condition. Wait, are you telling me that a steel post can determine the condition of the soil? Well, yes and no. It doesn't necessarily read the conditions of the soil down there per se, but it does send back different readings to the controller of the machine. At the end of the day, based on the torque load put on the machine, we can determine the load capacity of each helical pile. What are the load requirements for each post? Well, that is predetermined by an engineer who designs the sunroom substructure. With that information, the pile installer can make sure that each pile will meet that load requirement. Then, the installer submits his field report to a third-party engineer who then stamps the report. Thus, we have engineered proof that each footing will be able to hold up the load that will be put upon it. What about the third issue? Time consumption. Well, this process is very quick. Most footing installs for our sunrooms take less than a day. Since there is no concrete used, we can start building on them immediately. In some cases, we can even start building on them the same day. But what about the inspector? Doesn't he need to inspect the footings? There's nothing on site that he can actually see that will help him determine whether or not a footing is sufficient. Thus, we don't call him for an inspection. Rather, once we receive the engineered stamped field report back from the third-party engineer, we simply submit this paperwork to the inspector, and that's it. Funny thing is, many times when we are submitting our footing paperwork to the inspector, we are also asking for a framing inspection since we were able to keep things moving on site. All in all, helical pile footings are easier, better, and much faster than conventional concrete footings. And since we at Hudson Valley Sunroom strive to build the best, this is part of our standard operation.